One of the most exciting parts of a new Mortal Kombat game is seeing the collection of characters we have at our disposal to play as, fight against, and fatality. And every game has a different selection to choose from, some better than others, so let's find out what the best Mortal Kombat roster is. Hello my fellow oddities, and welcome to my ranking from worst to best of every mainline Mortal Kombat roster, from the first game in 1992 all the way to Mortal Kombat 1 in 2023. I'll also be ranking any expansion versions of these games when they have them, such as UMK3, MK Gold, and MK Unchained. The way I'll be deciding the best roster will not just be who's there and how many, but I'll also be looking at surrounding context. Do they make sense to be there considering the story, who else is on the roster, and how their presence changes the overall game's atmosphere. This will make sure that it's not just a popularity and size contest, giving older games with smaller rosters a chance against more modern titles. And for some games, I will also create my own version of its roster using Molim's roster creator on DeviantArt to show you how it could have been improved, of course in my opinion. The link to the roster creator will be in the description if you want to try it out, though since it uses Flash, you'll have to download a Flash emulator to run it. Also, I'm not including any ports or handheld devices which have slightly altered rosters, so no MK Advance or Tournament Edition, and obviously games like Special Forces, Mythologies, and Shaolin Monks don't really qualify. Maybe Shaolin Monks, but if you want I can talk about that game in the comments. So let's get right into the worst Mortal Kombat roster, which I believe is base Mortal Kombat 4. This roster is let down by two things. Firstly, the returning characters they brought back are fairly safe and uninteresting. You got the Special Forces with Jax and Sonya, the other heroes Johnny Cage, Liu Kang, Raiden, the ninjas, Reptile, Sub-Zero, and Scorpion, the characters that are in almost every game. And then the new characters are a mixed bag. Tanya, Fujin, and Quan Chi are good additions, but Jarek, Kai, Reiko, and even the main villain, Shinnok, are pretty underwhelming. So here's how I change it. I don't think we need both Jax and Sonya to represent the Special Forces, so I got rid of Jax to keep the trinity of Liu, Johnny, and Sonya. I also got rid of Jarek because he's Jarek. I reluctantly decided to throw out Reiko as well, since even though I think he's a cool concept, I don't really know if his character fits a Shinnok story. He should be in a game centered around Shao Kahn or just Outworld in general. I also got rid of Reptile because he's got a weird design in this game, and it doesn't really make sense why he'd work for Shinnok to be honest. The characters I replaced them with are Noob Saibot, who can fill Reptile's role since he has a stronger connection to the Brotherhood of Shadow. I included Sindel since Edenia is being invaded by Shinnok, and she was even in the MK4 comic. I added in Serena since she was in Mythologies, so it'd be a big reunion with her, Fujin, Quan Chi, and Bihan in the same game. And finally, I included Kitana for similar reasons to Sindel. It's honestly kinda weird a game with Edenia as a big focus only has one Edenian on the base roster. You also might be wondering why I kept Kai, even though I've said in the past that he's one of the worst characters. Well, it's not really this game's fault future titles decided to do nothing with him. I think he could be better if given the chance. Moving on though to the next roster, I have base Mortal Kombat 3. Now, most people would have this as their worst since it commits the great sin of getting rid of all the ninja characters, including Scorpion. I never really hated this roster that much though, since I enjoyed most of the new characters they came up with. However, it's undeniable that this roster doesn't really feel quite right without some of the most iconic characters, especially after the previous two games featured them so prominently. It kind of feels like a forced disclusion that doesn't feel natural and sticks out like a sore thumb. I wasn't really able to change much about this roster though, since I don't want to sacrifice the first appearance of so many new characters to replace them with the older ones. So I got rid of two of the characters that stuck out as the least important to me, or that don't have a lot of potential in the story. And that was Stryker and Shang Tsung. Stryker should be pretty obvious, and I don't really think Shang Tsung has a massive role to play in this story. He's the one that helps resurrect Sindel, and that's about it. I replaced these two with Scorpion because his inclusion improves the roster tenfold, and then Kitana because her story with Sindel is so amazing in this game and she deserves to be there for it. There were a few other characters I considered removing, such as Shiva, as she's proven to be quite useless going forward, but with her connection to the sub-boss Motaro and Sindel as her bodyguard, I decided to keep her. Kung Lao is also a consideration for dropping out because he does die, but I didn't want to get rid of too many good guys since a big part of this game is the Defenders of Earthrealm. This was also Sonya and Kano's big returns after MK2 left them out, so even though they're not super important, I elected to keep them in. Moving on, I got MK vs DC. There's not really much to say on this one, it's not even a full roster of characters, it's half a roster, and it tries to include the most prominent characters within the first few games. I think it does a good job overall at doing that, but just naturally, it's gonna feel kinda lacking. The only changes I made were replacing Kano and Jax with Kung Lao and Johnny Cage, since I think they're more important. I was worried removing Kano would make it so there's not enough villains, but they all team up anyway, so I don't think it matters too much. And finally, I replaced Baraka with Reptile. There needs to be a go-to jobber, and I just think Reptile's cooler. Next roster I have is Mortal Kombat X. In my opinion, this game fumbled the bag pretty hard with its roster, when it had such a great setup to be an all-timer. In a game that's loosely adapting MK4, and had a tie-in comic with several 3D era character appearances, and has cameos in the story from 3D era characters, the actual roster only has 5, 3 not counting DLC. Characters like Serena, Li Mei, Frost, and Fujin are more important to the story than Ferrator, and that's another thing. Too many new characters just feel unnecessary and or poorly written. So here's what I'd change, and this is by far the most significant roster change thus far, granted there's way more characters now. Let's start with the combat kids. Takeda and Cassie can stay since they're more interesting, but Jackie and Kung Jin I'm getting rid of. Jackie is useless, and I think Kung Jin undermines Kung Lao. I replaced them with Frost, who would be interesting as the combat kid that goes evil, leading into MK11, and Kai, since this is an adaptation of MK4, and he was meant to be the next generation's Liu Kang. Next, since Jackie is no longer in the picture, Jax can go, and I've put Serena there instead. She could have an interesting dynamic with the Revenants and can try to save them like Bi-Han saved her, which we got a glimpse of in the story.
It is possible to escape Quan Chi Katana. I can aid you, as Bi-Han aided me.
Then Kano can go as well, since he's really just irrelevant, and I included Fujin instead. Again, this is adapting MK4, Fujin should be in there more than just a story cameo. And finally, instead of Ferrator, I brought in Li Mei, since she's featured pretty prominently in the story, and could have been a good showcase of how the conflict between Kotal and Mileena affects the average Outworlder. Moving on now to Mortal Kombat 11's roster. This is very similar to MKX for me, but slightly more forgivable since it focuses more on the arcade era rather than MK4 and the 3D era like MKX, but it still has a lack of variety when it comes to the characters. This time around, Frost and Fujin are the only 3D era characters included, with Fujin being DLC. Most of the rest of the characters are the typical safe options, though I do like this game's focus on bringing back a lot of MK3 characters since they often don't get as much love as the ones from 1 and 2. Then there's a few NRS characters slipped in there, some of which returning from MKX, and the others being new characters. This one was hard to change because I wanted more 3D era character representation, but the story just doesn't really allow for it too much. But here's what I got. I got rid of Cetrion and Collector cause they're ass, and replaced them with Smoke and Ashra. Ashra is kind of my risky pick. I think she could have had a cool story where her past self is still a Sisterhood of Shadow member, and in the present she's the Ashra we all know and love. This gives her a lot of customization options, and she also can make the process of restoring Sindel make a lot more sense than it does in Aftermath. And Smoke is one of those characters that should never sit out for more than one game in a row, so he should have returned after his absence in MKX. He could have had an interesting storyline with his human version from MK9 coming back and interacting with his Revenant form, and at some point one of them is turning into a cyborg. Speaking of which, I got rid of Aaron Black and Devora and replaced them with Cyrax and Sector. They're in the story, Sector in particular has a pretty large role, so it just made sense to bring them back to me. And finally, I never really liked that Rain was DLC in this game, since he had already been DLC in MK9. So instead of him, I made Stryker the DLC character, that way you don't really have to worry about story for him, and you can round out more base MK3 characters. Moving on now, I have Mortal Kombat Gold. This is a huge improvement over the base roster, including more unique and flashy picks for returning characters than the base MK4 did. Gold brings back Cyrax, Mileena, Kitana, Kung Lao, Baraka, Goro, Sector, and Noob Saibot. The problem is though, 2 of those characters I already included in my change to the MK4 base roster, so I'll have to include 2 new characters to fill out the roster for MK Gold. And I think it's pretty simple. Combining my MK4 roster with Gold's roster gives us 2 of the female ninjas and 2 of the cyber ninjas, so just make that 3 for both of them. Bring in Jade and bring in Cyber Smoke. Done, easy. Moving on now to... controversy time. I got Mortal Kombat Armageddon. Now, yes, typically a roster that includes literally every character in the series up to that point would be the best one. But remember my criteria. It's not just about the size of the roster and who's there, but also their relevance, connections to other characters, and how they affect the game overall. And there being so many characters kinda screwed this game over and made it worse than it could have been, with only 2 fighting stances, no unique fatalities, and very few new designs. Plus, a lot of these characters feel so useless. This gimmick of including every character is cool, but thinking about it in the context of a mainline entry into the franchise, it's not ideal. So, I made a roster for Armageddon that's sort of the culmination of the 3D era, featuring the most prominent and important characters. I'm not going to go through this one in depth since I think it's pretty self-explanatory why everyone's there. Chameleon with a K would be a secret character, and the default looking dude in the corner there is the creative fighter. Also, I included Shinnok, who wasn't really in the main 3D era that much, because he is kinda important to Armageddon's story. He wouldn't be there if he wasn't. Same thing with Sector. Moving on now to the OG, Mortal Kombat 1992. I'ma say right now, there are no changes to make to this roster, cause obviously this is the first game, so there's no one to replace anyone with. Not that I would if I could. This roster is simple but effective. It is missing a bit of that MK spice since so many characters hadn't been introduced yet. It's all Earth Roamers, which can be a bit stale even just to look at on the select screen. But really, how can I criticize this too much? It's the OG. Every character is iconic and important. Besides maybe Kano. I can't really dig into it too much, but the following titles just have better rosters since they have more options. Now we're on to Base Deception, which is a solid roster. I think all of the returning character picks are good, I have no problem with them. Where my issues come in is with the new characters. Dairu, Kira, and Cobra are just useless. I kinda understand Kira and Cobra with them being part of the new Black Dragon, but I still elected to remove them. And Dairu... well, it's Dairu. But seriously, we already had a character representing the Sidon Resistance with Darius. We didn't need 2. So I replaced those 3 with Reiko, Serena, and Fujin. Reiko makes sense since we know Shao Kahn returns later on in this game's story. Serena really should have been in this game since she plays a big part in the Noob Saibot and Sub-Zero storyline. And Fujin just makes sense. He's been absent since MK4, and with Dark Raiden here now, I think Fujin should have come in to be the voice of reason. Other than that though, a very good, underrated roster. Just above it though, I have Mortal Kombat Deadly Alliance. This one just includes a few more iconic characters, and there's really only one new character I'd call egregiously bad, and that's Su Hao. Everyone else here are really good picks. Of course, the main standout feature of this roster is no Liu Kang for the first and only time in the series, but I don't mind that at all since unlike MK3 removing Scorpion, there's a big, crucial story reason for him not being there. As far as changes go, the only thing I changed was replacing Su Hao with Reiko. Firstly, there's no MK4 representation in this roster, which is weird because it's the game directly after it, and I think with Shao Kahn dying, quote unquote, it makes sense for Reiko to come back into the picture, trying to become the new Outworld ruler before Mileena comes in Deception. But yeah, that's all the alterations I would make. We're starting to get into the really good rosters here. Next up, I got MK Trilogy. This is not as high as many others, if not most would have it, for the same reasons as Armageddon. Trilogy doesn't have a unique story at all, everything is just carried over from UMK3, so this roster just doesn't feel like it has a lot of substance. It's just a bunch of characters thrown on a select screen. Like, obviously it's cool to play as so many characters, but a roster is a big part of making a fighting game feel unique, like a distinct entry, so when you just include everyone, it kinda gets lost in the mix of which games feel the most important. So, like with Armageddon, I made a roster that's just the most crucial characters of the arcade era. This one's even more self-explanatory. Pause the video to get a good look at everyone. Moving on into the top 5 Mortal Kombat rosters, I have Mortal Kombat Unchained. the expansion to Deception that brought in Shao Kahn, Goro, Frost, Jax, Blaze, and Kitana. It's not a crazy improvement like MK4 to MK Gold, but it's enough to bump it up a few spots. The only change I would make, other than what I've already changed about Deception, is replacing Jax with Kung Lao. Jax is kind of the odd one out here and feels out of place among these other new additions. Kung Lao is cooler, more important, and fits in a little better. Now on to Mortal Kombat 2. This is where the rosters start to become goated. Mortal Kombat 2, I've always said, is the game that made Mortal Kombat what it is. Yes, the original is a strong base, nothing would exist without it, but Mortal Kombat 2 really took the franchise in the iconic direction it needed. Even if it was just slightly different, we're looking at a completely altered franchise. The roster makes this obvious. Even the returning characters are glimmering with new life and colors, and of course the new characters really spice things up. Playable Reptile and Shang Tsung, the female ninjas, Jax, Kung Lao, they all tripled the iconicness of this franchise. Again, like the original, I have nothing to change here. Goro, Sonya, and Kano are the only characters who don't come back from the first game, and I'm sure as hell not going to replace anyone to include them. And by the way, the entire top 4 doesn't have any changes I would make, so we're done with that. But moving on, I got UMK3 taking the bronze medal up next. I mean, people complained about the MK3 roster, so Midway just said, hey, fine, you want ninjas? Have them all. And by golly, is it glorious. This is just such a great roster that still includes the uniqueness of MK3's base roster, with Baraka and Raiden being left off for story reasons, so it's not like Trilogy or Armageddon, which just has everyone and doesn't feel representative of the story it's telling. It just includes all of the ninjas, some of which are still important to MK3's story, which really makes you question why they were left off in the first place. And then it still includes all the unique and kinda weird MK3 new characters, and this time I don't have to remove Shang Tsung or Stryker, so yeah, great all around roster. We still got 2 to go though, both of which are from modern titles from the last 15 years. And the runner-up for best MK roster is Mortal Kombat 9. Now you might already be saying,
but Oddity, you ranked Trilogy so much lower despite the rosters being almost exactly the same.
Here's my reasoning. You see, MK9's roster not only includes a few new additions that create a big effect, but all these characters now have a story mode that gives them the substance that Trilogy didn't have. For every character, there's now reason to be on this roster. It's a retelling of the first 3 arcade-era games, not just basically an expansion on MK3 with the same gameplay and story that extra characters just kind of feel tagged onto. Plus, the addition of Quan Chi, Cyber Sub-Zero, Kenshi, and Scarlet make this roster come into its own very well in my opinion, despite these additions being the minority compared to the Trilogy characters making up most of the roster. Of course, there's no Cyber Smoke or Motaro, and the bosses aren't playable, but I don't really mind that too much because I think what they have is great on its own, and considering the relevance to the story, those other characters aren't needed. I'm sorry, I'm dying on the hill that Cyber Sub-Zero was a good switch up to the formula over Smoke. Is Cyber Smoke better? Hell yes, but we can mix it up sometimes, can't we? But I think the best Mortal Kombat roster is the most recent one. It might be controversial, but I think MK1 has the best Mortal Kombat roster of all time. Let me explain why. This game came out after years of safe, arcade-era heavy rosters. Characters like Jax, Sonya, and Kano were getting stale, and we wanted to explore more than just Earthrealm and Outworld. So what did Mortal Kombat 1 do? It gave us variety. Variety in the modern era. So while games like Deception and Deadly Alliance featured a lot of cool new characters, they didn't have the resources to truly give us that huge array of options. Mortal Kombat 1 can though, and it's amazing. There are 19 arcade-era characters, with most being the otherworldly, fantastical types rather than boring humans, 2 NRS-era characters, both of which being among the better ones, and finally, 8 3D-era characters, which may not seem like a huge amount, but compared to previous games, this was a big step up. Especially since they were all among the great 3D-era characters. Kenshi, Natara, Quan Chi, Ashra, Havoc. Were all of them treated right within the story? Absolutely not, which does prevent this roster from being just unbeatable, but I'm glad they were in there either way. And you guys know that I'm not one to be affected by recency bias. I have been very critical of MK1 in the past, but I have to give it credit where it's due with this amazing roster, which doesn't even count the cameos by the way, which has Serena, Motaro, Sonya, Jax, Kano, Tremor, and many more. But you guys let me know in the comments down below your ranking for the Mortal Kombat rosters. Subscribe and leave a like if you want, and that's wraps on this one, my fellow oddities. I'll see you next time.